Cardiff University. We want to talk about generalized braid categories.
Yeah. So, firstly, my big thanks to Ernesto for inviting me here and giving me a chance to give this talk in this wonderful place. So, I don't expect anybody to have heard about generalized braid category, because that's essentially a new object which I'm going to introduce in this talk. So, some of the people present in this audience over last number of years have been listening to talks by myself and my co-author Rina Anno, which started off as sort of being honest algebraic geometry and then progressed into the technical wilderness of PG enhancements and infinity enhancements and whatnot. So I thought I'd sort of put together this talk, which essentially says that, you know, behind our interest in spherical functors, p-functors, and all these sort of technical gadgets stands a sort of genuine geometrical problem which we need all this technology to solve. So this is sort of a program where all the stuff that we do and all the papers we put out sort of fits in. So, but before sort of telling what a generalized braid category is, let me sort of remind you of what an ordinary sort of braid group is, which with generalized braid category is meant to generalize. Now, I suspect there are quite a few people in this room who know what a braid group is. However, I will quickly run over this material in order to draw some parallels with what I'm going to introduce later. So the elements, so there are sort of two outlooks on braid group. First one is that it's a certain sort of topological trinket. So the elements of BRN are n braids, configurations of n disjoint pieces of string with n fixed endpoints. So here are some examples of elements of BR5. Now, these configurations, the pieces of string are not allowed to loop back. So these are considered optoisotopies, which keep the strands disjoint. So you can sort of continuously transform this, but at no point must two strings touch each other. So the composition is defined by concatenation. So that's a sort of typical example of what happens. You have these two braids, then you sort of stick them together, and then you can use isotopy to smooth it out. So in this case, we saw that these two elements are actually inverse to each other. So sort of crossing one way, composed with crossing another way, gives you identity element. And the fact that this is identity, that the identity element is given by n parallel strands, also follows immediately from composition being concatenation. So you can also view it purely algebraically. You have a group which is generated by n generators, which generator Ti and its inverse correspond to sort of crossings one way. Sorry? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And these are subject to well-known braid relations. So if the indices, so if two crossings happen far apart, if the indices are more than one apart of the crossings, then they just commute. And so-called commutation condition. And if you try to look at how the adjacent crossings interact, then you have these braiding conditions. Ti, Tj, Ti is Tj, Ti, Tj. So now the sort of beginnings of the story that we are interested in is this categorification story. So if you have a group, you can act on it on sort of a vector space, on a variety, but you can also act by a group on a category. So I will tell you about a sort of well-known result of Hovanoff and Thomas. They actually proved it about the affine braid group, but for the simplicity, let's sort of just look at that categorification of the just ordinary braid group. So let FLN denote variety of complete flux. So you have this sequence of subspaces in Cn, dimension of Vi is I. And then T star of FLN is the cotangent bundle of complete flat variety, which I consider as a sort of algebraic variety of its own, so I take its total space. And then all the derived categories in this talk will be bounded derived categories of coherent sheaves. So D, and they'll denote it by D with no indices. So the result proved by Hovanoff and Thomas in about 2005 is that there is a categorical action of the braid group on from the derived category of complete flag of cotangent bundle to complete flag variety. So to be more precise, let me tell you how that works. So let FLM with I hat denote the partial flag variety, where we keep all the subspaces except for dimension I subspace, which we skip out. Then there's a following geometrical construction. So first of all, we have a forgetful map. If you have a complete flag, you can just forget dimension I subspace and get the partial flag in FLM I hat. Now this map is a P1 bundle, of course, because you are by forgetting this sort of dimension I subspace, you are still sandwiched between dimension I minus 1 and dimension I plus 1 subspaces. So you're in C2 and you're choosing a one-dimensional subspace of C2. So we have a P1 choices above every partial flag like this. Now, what you can do is you can take cotangent bundle on the partial flag variety and pull it back to get a vector bundle on the complete flag variety. And then if you consider its total space. So this is now sort of a variety of itself. Now, this comes equipped with a projection to the cotangent bundle here. An element here is a complete flag with the tangent vector which belongs to the partial flag here. So there is a projection where we forget about tangent vector, and then this is just the same P1 bundle here. But also, we can include this into the cotangent bundle of the complete flag variety by considering the tangent vector here as a sort of tangent vector here. Now that's a divisorial inclusion. So this sits as a divisor inside here. So we have a P1 bundle, sort of dimension 1, sort of vibration with fibers of dimension 1, and we have a codimension 1 inclusion here. So this is a sort of typical setup where spherical functors arose, and indeed define Si to be the functor which goes from derived category of this variety to derived category of this variety by taking first a pull back to this divisor and then taking a direct image inside here. So pi I upper star and then iota I lower star. Then firstly, for each I from 1 to n minus 1, this functor is a spherical functor. So you notice that this base variety will change. By varying I, you get a bunch of functors from derived category of each corresponding partial flag variety to the same derived category of total flag variety. Each of these functors is spherical. Now, spherical functors, a number of people have told us about them. The thing about a spherical functor is that if you put a spherical functor from here to here, it produces an auto-equivalence of the target variety and of the source variety. Here we are interested in the auto-equivalences of the target variety, so-called spherical twists. The auto-equivalences here are called spherical co-twists. And yeah, sorry, this is a typo. This should be Ti. So a Ti inside the group of auto-equivalences of derived category of complete flag variety is a spherical twist about the spherical functor Si. So out for each partial flag variety, for each dimension we skip, we obtain an auto-equivalence of the derived category of complete flag variety. And assigning each of these auto-equivalences to the braid group generator Ti defines a categorical action of the braid group on this derived category of complete flag variety. So that's the result of Covenant and Thomas. Now, how do you usually prove this? Well, you have generators. All you need to know is you want to write down the Fourier-Mukai kernel for each of those functors, and then you want to verify that for Fourier-Mukai kernels the braid relations hold. That's a rather messy computation which Covenant and Thomas carried out. Actually, we have for ages had a paper in progress which needed some of this technology we've been developing, which says that actually there is a very general geometrical criteria. If you have a variety, ambient variety, no longer anything to do with arbitrary variety, nothing to do with flux. And it has inside it n fibrations, so it has n subvarieties, each of which is fibered over a base. Then you can describe it perfectly geometrically, how these fibrations must intersect with each other in order for these functors, firstly the fibrations have to be spherical. So you have ambient variety, subvariety, and a base. So we want this functor to be spherical, and then if the geometrical criteria for the intersection hold, the spherical twists will braid. So there is a way basically to analyze what happens here and bring these braid relations down to geometry as opposed to just sort of brute force Green-Lokai calculations. But there is a sort of more interesting question. I haven't written this down on the slide, but there is, you can sort of, and the reason I haven't written this down is because I'm going to say something very vague. Kautis and Kamnitzer defined a categorical action of a tangle calculus. So instead of braids, you have essentially tangles. And that can sort of be identified, the varieties whose derived categories are on which this tangle calculus act can sort of be identified with Springer fibers inside complete and partial flood varieties. So somehow you can extend, we know that you can sort of extend this braid group to a richer structure, which is no longer a group but sort of a category, and which involves not just complete flood variety but all the partial flood varieties. However, when we looked at what you get there, we realized that tangle calculus by Kautis and Kamnitzer does not act. It only works on the Springer fibers inside the flood variety. It doesn't work on the whole thing. So you have a more complicated structure acting on the whole derived categories of complete and partial flood varieties, which simplifies to tangle calculus on the slices that Kautis and Kamnitzer took. So in order to describe what acts there instead of tangle calculus, we arrive to the following definition. So first let me describe this generalized braid category topologically. So generalized braids are configurations of n strands which we are now done. They're still not allowed to loop back, but we no longer require them to be disjoint. We allow them to overlap. However, we allow them to overlap in a very controlled way. Strands can join two at a time, continue as a multiplicity to strand, and then possibly split apart. I'll give an example in a moment. More generally, any two strands with multiplicities p and q can join up and continue as a strand with multiplicity p plus q, and then sort of possibly split up. Any strand with higher multiplicity can split into two strands with lower multiplicity. It's important that we only allow for strands to join or split up two at a time at most. So here are some generalized braids. So here we start with a sort of classical configuration of disjoint strands, and now, this is this is a sort of bad diagram because we must always specify the order in which strands come together. So let's say that here first these two strands come together and then this one joins them. So and then you can have so this strand crosses over this one, and this one just doesn't interact with them at all. So a more interesting example is this. You have, firstly, you can start as a multiple strand and go happily throughout the whole braid while still being this multiplicity 2 strand. Here we have multiplicity 2 and multiplicity 1 strand joining together, continuing and splitting apart like this. So, of course, the question is, what sort of isotopies do I allow? So essentially, I will elaborate on this in a few seconds. They must preserve the intervals where strands come together. They must preserve the number of intervals, and they must preserve the order in which strings join in the interval. For example, here is what we allow to do to these intervals by isotopy. Suppose you have this simple sort of situation. What you allow it to do is you can make an interval bigger. You can sort of elongate the interval where strands join together. Or you can make it short, or you can make it shorter. What you are not allowed to do is you cannot take an interval and make it so small that it splits apart completely. What you're also not allowed to do is you're not allowed to take two intervals and elongate them so much that they join up. And instead of two intervals, you end up with one interval. Finally, you're not allowed to change the order in which the strings come together. So you're not allowed to do this essentially. Now, well,
are you allowed to change them if you have strands that don't touch each other, or are you allowed to change the order?
Yeah. We'll see it go on. So I must say that I'm very interested. This is something we sort of came up empirically by looking at the what do those derived functors behave like on flat varieties. This may not be a final definition. We're in the process of writing it out. So I'll be if anyone here has encountered anything like this in their research, I'd be very interested to hear that. So, since strands have multiplicity, we must allow endpoints to have multiplicity as well. So instead of a single configuration of n disjoint endpoints, we have multiple endpoint configurations, which are all indexed by partitions of n. The composition is again given by concatenation of endpoints much. So here is a a more substantial example. So we have two generalizations like this. So this is a partition of 3, 1, 2. This is another partition of 3, 2, 1. This is also 2, 1, so they match. So what we can do is we can take the concatenation, and then this is what we're allowed to do isotropy-wise. So in particular, this was our original, so the really complicated question in this business is how to define, as you will see in a moment, these intersections, these sort of crossings over of strands. And this sort of thing allows you to reduce them essentially, to have a hope of an inductive procedure which would reduce definition to crossings of lower multiplicity. But it turned out, as you will see now, we don't have to do that. And well, of course, when the endpoints don't match, the composition is 0. So algebraically, you arrive to the following definition. A generalized braid category has object set, partitions of n. So I'll write them as this vector k underscore. It will have partition k1 blah km such that the sum of all k's is n. So morphism spaces, for any two partitions of n, I define the morphism space between them are generalized braids whose initial and endpoints configurations are k and k dash up to isotopy. Composition is concatenation if endpoints match and 0 otherwise. And finally, identity is parallel strand braids. So for each partition of n, we have this parallel configuration. So all the morphisms in generalized braid category are generated by composition by the following 4 basic types. You have joinings, so sort of two multiple strands coming together and nothing happening in the rest of the braid. Splittings, crossings over one way and sort of crossings over the other way. So these are subject to generalized braid relations, and sort of our goal number 1, this is very much a work in progress, is to, but this one we hope to have sort of done very shortly, which means within a year, hopefully. So we want to write down these generalized braid relations for these morphisms above. So we want to write down essentially the relations which need to be checked for. So then to categorify generalized braid category, you need to exhibit a functor for each of these 4 basic types, and you need to then check that these functors satisfy these braid relations. So here's sort of what we believe happens with flat varieties. So for each partition of n, denote by FLN k the corresponding partial flat variety. So if this partition consists of k1 blah km, then we have subspaces vk1, vk1 plus k2, and so on until vk1 plus km, which is, this is n, so this is just the whole vector space. So just to give an example, observe that if you have a sort of complete partition, all ones, then the corresponding partial flat variety is the complete flat variety, because you have 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3, and so on. On the second, kind of the opposite example, if you consider partition 1 n minus 1, then what you get is Pn minus 1. Because you have P1 and then you go straight to Cn. The choice of one-dimensional space in Cn is Pn minus 1. And partition M n minus m is the Grassmanian of m planes in n space. And then xk x sort of undercross k is my total space of the cotangent bundle on this partial flat braid. And then we actually have very similar construction to Hohmann and Thomas, except that we are actually interested in the sort of functors themselves and not just their twists. So let Si be a PQ splitting, which splits ith thread into multiplicity P and P plus Q into a thread of multiplicity P and thread of multiplicity Q. So this means that this Ki is P plus Q, this, and then this gets split into P and Q, and so nothing happens anywhere else. Just as before, we have a forgetful map between the corresponding flat varieties, partial flat varieties, which just forgets this extra subspace which we have in this situation. And this will be a Grassmanian PP plus Q bundle, just as before we had a P1 bundle. So in the Hohmann and Thomas case, we were dealing with Si essentially 1-1, when we had double strands splitting into two single strands. And Grassmanian 1-2 is of course P1. So then we can pull back the cotangent bundle to here, take its total space. This has a natural projection where we just forget about the tangent vector, which lands you in cotangent bundle here, which is a Grassmanian bundle. Now this is no longer a divisorial inclusion, it's an inclusion whose codimension is precisely the dimension of this Grassmanian. And now we define Si k dash to be the functor pull back and direct image plus a line bundle twist, which now that's sort of exactly which line bundle twist will need to be worked out. And then we claim the following situation happens. If you assign to every object of the generalized braid category, every partition of n, the derived category of the cotangent bundle of the corresponding flat variety, if you, to each splitting, you assign the Si functor defined on the previous page, so each splitting goes to this functor from the partial flat between the partial flat varieties, which works like this. To each joining, you just assign a right adjoint of the splitting functor. To each crossing, now that's where we were stuck sort of for a long time. We were going to define this using an inductive procedure, and that's why we went into this. Now, I forgot to mention one thing. So this is only spherical when P and Q is 1 and 1. When P is 1 and Q is n minus 1, this is what's known in the literature as P functor, as a Pn functor, in fact. And in a sense, and that sort of generates an autoequivalence. But and when this is quite general, now there is no notion of Grassmanian functor in the literature. But in fact, after sort of thinking about this for a while, we realized that most likely there shouldn't be a notion of Grassmanian functor. There should be just a notion of Grassmanian system. But I don't have time to go into that. But what certainly happens is that there is a Countess-Cummings or Likota equivalence, which via sort of complicated geometrical representation theory, what they call categorical action of SLN, they construct an equivalent, derived equivalence between cotangent bundle of Grassmanian and cotangent bundle of the dual Grassmanian. And that's precisely what we need for our crossings. Indeed, sort of and then for the inverse crossing, you just assign the inverse of this equivalence. So when you have 1 n minus 1 case, this functor is a P functor. And essentially, this equivalence plus composed with another such, so basically ti k dash composed with ti, not ti minus 1, k dash k is a non-trivial or the equivalence of the source variety, which is basically the p-twist. And the kind of hope is that whatever notion of Grassmanian twist which will come out of this will also be just composition of two countries coming spherical equivalences. So this sort of takes care of the lot of it. For every object and for each of the 4 types of generating morphisms, we have defined the corresponding functors. This sort of spherical Pn and, well, Grassmanian in a sense functors, their right adjoints, and the corresponding equivalences. And then we believe that this is subject to generalized braid relations, the topological model we've described, and this defines the categorical action of this generalized braid category. So I believe I'm out of time.
Any questions?
Does the action, and I guess conjecturally, this guy, is that gonna give you an action on the DG pre-triangulated category?
Good question. I mean, sort of some years ago, I would have said immediately yes, because of course the stuff that we build, is all our constructions work by DG enhancements. All these sort of twists are constructed essentially by a sort of twisted complexes of things in enhancement. But I think that I'm sort of comfortable to say that
Wouldn't there be some sort of higher homotopy type of things to?
Yes, I mean already in spherical functors, you do not get everything cleanly individual. You end up with sort of homotopies there. So you don't have a clean adjunction upstairs, and I don't think so. I don't think this will lift to the action on the corresponding sort of DG enhancement. Yeah. So I was just going to say what happens with spherical functors and what will happen with p functors, which we are putting out the paper out on shortly. And what will happen here is that everything will be defined up in DG enhancements, but it will define action only up to homotopy.
I mean, there's no notion of homotopy action, which is, doesn't act literally. I mean, say even when a group acts on a category, it's too strong to assume that it's acts literally. There's homotopy action, like the local system of BG. So here, a similar story. So you shouldn't try to act literally on a DG category.
But the group will be the group as a k by one of the group, and not with some higher homotopy things in the group. It's not clear that if you take sort of the infinity group that's generated by those generators and relations, that might not be the same as this is like you want to call it.
At the moment, I'm not really comfortable at saying what will happen, how well we can sort of control higher homotopies. All I'm happy to say is that the generalized braid relations will hold, each individual one will hold up to some homotopy. What will happen to homotopies there? Well, let us verify the braid relations on the sort of simplest level first, then we'll see what happens to the higher homotopies.